Thank you so much. I know this is post-lunch, which is why I sense that the sort of participants, they're not as many as I would like to hope. But given the excellent panelists that we have, I hope you listen, because when we were told about this session, the lens trilogy, seeing inclusion through 3 different lenses, I couldn't have hoped for a better set of panelists to be speaking about this. I'd like to first introduce Mr. Daniel Sobel. He's a globally recognized authority on inclusive education. He's an author. He's published more than 100 articles and 3 best-selling books. And please, Mr. Daniel, if you could just come on stage. I'd like to invite Saim Sadiq, a filmmaker, onto the stage as well. You know him because of Joyland, a film that has had international acclaim. It made its premiere at the Cannes Film Festival as an official selection. It went on to win the jury prize. It went on to premiere at the Sundance Film Festival and Toronto International Film Festival as well. And it was also shortlisted for the Best International Film at the Oscars. His other work, I believe his academic work was on his short film Darling, which I plan to watch tonight. I haven't seen it yet. But Saim, please come on stage. And finally, Aisha Rayan. She's a human rights and development specialist. She's based in Islamabad, managing programs and partnerships for Adam Smith International's portfolio of Pakistan development programming. She is also serving as a member of Amnesty International Canada's board of directors. Aisha, please come on stage. Thank you. So because Saim is sitting next to me, when I think of trilogies, I think of films, to be honest. There's a prequel and then there's the actual event, then a post-sequel and then a spin-off. But here is how I see the Lens trilogy in terms of inclusion. It's about ability, identity, and belonging. I've introduced our 3 panelists, and I'd kind of like you to raise your hands when I call out their names. When we think of ability, identity, or belonging, so for instance, ability. Do you think of Daniel, who's an educationist? Raise your hands. Only one hand. Okay, identity. Do you think of, let me see, Saim? Nobody. No, there's no identity. I guess my last one would have been belonging for Aisha, but I'm guessing that nobody's going to raise their hand for that either. But it's okay, but this is how I see all these 3 panelists and what they'll be speaking about. I'd like to begin with Daniel, whose expertise is in education. This particular session is being organized by University Neurodivergence. As an example, ADHD, autism is a big conversation on how do we include children on these spectrums? How do we teach them? So my question for Daniel would be, what is the one simplest way of ensuring that children with different abilities, neurodivergence, how you can include them in the education sector?
When I was at school, my ADHD was not identified. I was thought of as being lazy and stupid. And I did not graduate school or go to university until I was able to go straight to master's level in my mid-20s and did various masters and wrote PhD and things like this. I think my personal narrative and my personal experience in the education sector of having seen the education world 30 years ago not really be able to identify the basics of dyslexia or autism or ADHD and the spectrum of, the very broad spectrum of neurodiversity, to now being aware of it. I would imagine that most teachers here, if you're a teacher here and you've heard of dyslexia, would you raise your hand? Would you raise your hand if you've heard of autism? And if you were asked that question 20 years ago, the vast majority of people wouldn't have raised their hands. So we've had a huge shift in knowledge and an understanding. But the main thing that we've had a shift in is understanding the problem. And so I'm getting there, bear with me. There was a friend of mine who did a piece of research at one of Cambridge University's colleges looking at the prevalence of neurodiversity in the maths and science department of Cambridge University, looking at the students and the professors. And she found that there were indicators of neurodiversity at around 90%. And actually, in every domain of human endeavor, from whoever invented this screen and the chemistry and the electronics and the engineering that went into it, whoever invented the technology in this microphone that I'm speaking into and the light bulb and all of these sorts of things were made by people not who just parroted the same because they were the same, but because they pushed the frontiers of what it means to be human. And so I see this in every endeavor of humankind. For example, in Hollywood, or Bollywood probably, I don't know, but Hollywood certainly, you have a high percentage of actors and filmmakers with dyslexia. In Silicon Valley in America, I'm not sure you're even allowed in if you're not neurodiverse, if you're not on the autistic spectrum. I don't think it's possible, personally, I don't think it's possible to be a Nobel Prize winner unless you're neurodiverse. I don't think that the human experience of our advancing world is anything other than the human experience of what neurodivergents do when they're given the tools. Essentially, I think that we live in a neurodivergent world and we just let the neurotypicals walk among us for now. So let me mention something to you that you asked me, what is the most essential point, the one singular point that would shift is thinking of neurodiversity as disability, shifting that thought to thinking of neurodiversity as a different form of high ability. The end.
Oh, okay, so I'm going to ask a follow-up question here because our education and work systems are built for a certain kind of mind. How can work systems and education systems include more diverse minds? I mean, I know that you've sort of simplified this, and I'm sure it's much more complex. I want to probe a little more deeper into this.
The latest book I've been working on is examples of flagship education schools, schools from around the world, where what's common in terms of their amazing education, forward-thinking, modern thinking education, is that the environments adapt to the individual child, not the child having to adapt to the environment. And that is essentially the difference between what I would describe as inclusion 1.0 versus inclusion 2.0. The more forward-thinking, modern thinking way of which at least I parrot and I'm writing about and thinking about, is that it's very easy to adapt a school environment if you put your mind to it. There are many books, not least the ones that I've written, but there are many examples of how to do it. It really isn't rocket science. It's not like we think, somebody with ADHD, what could we possibly do? It's a mystery. How could we include them? These are the questions that people were asking in the 1980s and 90s. We are 30 years on from that conversation. And so the most, simple way of learning how to adapt your school to be able to meet the needs of all children is, well, just simply reading a book about it might be a good start. And there are some very good ones. And I'm sounding frustrated because, my team and I work in 140 countries. And the idea is that we're just trying to provide very simple information that all teachers should know anyway. And I think personally, having spent, much of my career working on this issue, that I think that it's easier to be a teacher of an adapting environment for all types of children than not. The old way of teaching, where you are the dominant teacher at the front, getting everybody to listen in the same way, act in the same way, and think in the same way, is really very exhausting. And there's a shift, I suppose, in thinking, are you doing a teacher-led class, or are you facilitating opportunities of learning across the classroom for actually lots of different minds that are before you? This is such a big topic, and I praise myself for limiting my words just to 3 minutes. I can't believe I did that. Right.
All right, we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you, because I do want to, I want to take what you said about adapting and neurotypical minds. As I said, my question was about how education and work systems seem to be built for a certain kind of mind. But then you also spoke about reading a book on it. People don't read as much as they used to, which is why we have film, Saim. And I think that has a lot of tremendous amount of impact. I also think just Joyland itself did not tell a stereotypical story. There's a hero, there's a villain, there's a love interest, there's a opposition, and then there's resolution. This was a complex story about identity and belonging from a very Pakistani perspective that made it to the sort of global stage. How much do you think art and film impact our understanding of identity and belonging compared to campaigns or books?
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, I think, it depends on what the purpose is. For example, awareness campaigns have their own place, and I think they're probably, if you make a 1 minute or 30-second or 2 minute little sizzle reel or campaign video about a particular message that you want the masses to know about, obviously it's way more accessible. You can put it on YouTube, it's a 30-second spot on TV, so of course way more people are watching that and consuming that. Versus a 2-hour film where there's a lot of choice involved. Is somebody going to actually watch it? There's so much choice in terms of what you can and cannot watch these days anyway. So I think that's why for me, I don't think the purpose of art to begin with is to pass on a message or to educate people. I think that's what schools are for. That's what, again, awareness campaigns are for. So I never take that pressure of like, oh, I know something so smart and so intelligent and so unique that I must take on the endeavor of imparting that knowledge through a film. Like I can write an essay or like, a Facebook post about it. I don't think films are for that. I think films are there to communicate a certain emotion, a certain lived reality of yourself or somebody else that you find fascinating. And they're not there to preach you something. They're mostly there to kind of allow you for an hour and a half or for 2 hours to shut your brain off, to pause your own life and to try, at least with a good film, to put yourself in somebody else's shoes or to live their life. Like that's what happens when you're moved by watching a film that has nothing to do with you, about people who you probably will never encounter in your real life. But you now see them in front of you in such a sort of visceral way that you're moved by them. It's almost like this is something that's happening to you. And I think that kind of emotional resonance is just good for the soul. Is that impact in terms of numbers the same impact that an awareness campaign would do? Obviously not. But I think that impact is more lasting and different, and it's just a different purpose compared to what awareness campaigns do. Yeah.
But do you think, for instance, I just want to get a comparison here. I think it's interesting. Your film was about gender and desire and identity, and these are controversial subjects in a country like Pakistan. You were challenging, at least you attempted to challenge people's perceptions of certain communities or certain kinds of people. What was the reception in Pakistan compared to the reception that you found globally?
Well, the reception in Pakistan is the one thing that everybody knows about Joyland. Even if they haven't seen Joyland, they know what the reception was for Joyland, which was not very good. And that's okay. It was my first film. I really had such low expectations from it. I just wanted to make it. For me, the win was just to be able to tell the story that I wanted to tell and do it in an honest way. And just when we finished the film, for me, it was over. You know, even if nobody else saw it, I didn't honestly care. Now I care because I made one film. For my next film, I would have those worries. But for Joyland, I didn't. But of course, in Pakistan, while there was, you know, a lot of people talk about the ban, a lot of people talk about the backlash, and, you know, that's that mostly, if you know about Joyland, you would be well aware of that. But very few people talk about the fact that I got so much love also from Pakistani audiences who actually bothered to go and watch it. You know, the hate mostly came from people who had never seen the film, which again is, you know, their ignorance, and I wish them well. I got a lot of love and a lot of sort of, I was surprised by how many people actually campaigned online when the ban was happening for the film to unban it, for example. We were not alone. There were a lot of activists and a lot of people in general. And not necessarily you would think that, oh, because it was a film with a trans character and that was the reason why it was getting banned. So, I mean, at least the stated reason, that it would mostly be people like that. But it was just generally, I think people were really offended more than I thought that they would be about, I don't know, the assumption that they're stupid enough to not know what they can and cannot watch. And for me, I think that was surprising that our Pakistani audiences are evolved enough. We don't give them enough credit. I think we always kind of tend to look down on them. Okay, oh, they only want to watch a certain kind of story. But I think I found that there was a big horde of people who were offended and who did think that, you know, it's not the job of the government or the state to tell them what they can and cannot watch, and that they're not smart enough to watch a film and take whatever they want to from it. That if they watch this film, I don't know, something will happen. You know, a joke that my friends used to make was like, oh, they read a comment somewhere, कि Joyland नहीं देखनी वरना हम सब gay बन जाएंगे. Like just by watching the film, you'll all sort of, you know, change your sexuality or change your gender, which of course is a stupid thing. And I'm glad that there are enough intelligent Pakistanis who think so. So I always tend to focus on that reception. Of course, globally it was, you know, got a much more easy route of release and reception as well. But you'd be surprised how many people have seen it in Pakistan as well on pirated links. You know, so I'm quite happy with whatever happened in retrospect. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Aisha, I'm going to move to the third lens, obviously, which is, I would say it's belonging in a way. You straddle worlds, Pakistan, you know, Canada as well. You're from the development sector that designs programs to help people be included in various programs. But I find, you know, when I've worked with the development sector, that often the people sitting and deciding what these programs should be are not at the table, right? So how can we make sure that they become co-creators rather than this top-down approach that Saim was talking about, which is that the state decides what you should and shouldn't watch, or a development sector consultant decides what program there should be to make it more inclusive?
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. And I entirely agree. The people who are making the decisions are not typically the people who are going to be impacted by the development programming that's happening here in Pakistan or in general around the world. And I actually just kind of picking up a little bit on what Saim was saying, I think one of the reasons for that, just to kind of elaborate on the premise of the question a little bit, is because when those decisions are being made, people are not putting themselves in the shoes of the people who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of these programs. So I've been getting a little bit into sociology recently, and there's a lot of interesting writing that highlights how wildly different the worlds that we inhabit are. So even within the development sector, you have the donors, maybe the British High Commission, maybe German aid, and what they're thinking about is, you know, in our current political climate, what can we say to sell aid as a priority to the voters at home? And then you have the people in the embassies, high commissions in Islamabad, commissions in Lahore, who are thinking in terms of meeting targets and metrics, and the professional scripts and the logics and the things that you need to do to perform as a successful person are super, super different for every role in the development sector. And unfortunately, none of those roles actually align with what the beneficiaries of this program want. So when it comes to changing that, that's a really difficult question. Well, it's both easy and it's difficult. So if you're looking at the development literature, there are actually best practices that are there. So the first thing that comes up is localization. So we need people who are from the context you're trying to affect to actually be the ones who are designing and implementing these programs. It doesn't make much sense for someone in London to be designing a program for Chakval. However, that's just not how the system, it's not how it works right now, but that would be one great thing, would be localization. The second thing that comes up often, nearly on a daily basis in my own work, is that a lot of what's happening in these development programs is not actually demand-driven. So a lot of the time, instead of going to the people who you're trying to help and saying, what would you actually like? What do you need? There are people, very educated bureaucrats and development experts, which I say with love because a lot of these people are absolutely fantastic at their jobs, who are reading a lot of books, not actually talking to a lot of people and saying, here's what I think the problem is, let me design a solution. And there's so much momentum in that process. It's institutionalized, it's professionalized. When those mistakes are made, there's not much you can do to kind of roll it back. So I think that the solution is very simple. It's talking to the people you're trying to affect, and it's doing what you can to put yourselves in their shoes when you're doing development.
No, I think Saim has hit upon the big theme that we're talking about here, right? Put yourself in another person's shoes. And I'm going to sort of take that to Daniel a little bit, because I do feel when we talk about, I'm pivoting a little bit, but taking from what Saim talked about. Daniel, I find that the pop culture idea of neurodivergence is one of, excellence. Think of, for instance, that movie with Tom Cruise. I've forgotten what's the name of it. No, not just Top Gun. It was in which I think he's autistic and he's brilliant. And it's always, exactly, Rain Man, that's the one. So that's I guess, stereotype that we've seen on pop culture. We're not really, what is that pressure on neurodivergent children, for instance, to not follow that stereotype? And what is the challenge for educators as well, that expectation?
One of the biggest challenges for people with neurodivergence is hiding it. And that's especially true for girls. Right now in England and Australia and America and Canada, there is a proliferation of women in their 30s and 40s who are realizing that they were neurodivergent and that they've been masking that for their whole lives. Masking and girls is itself a huge issue that causes huge psychological damage. And that is only something which I've noticed is being discussed in the last 2-3 years. The issue which you're referring to has this idea at the heart of it of needing to try and fit in with everyone else. And that has to do with the culture of your school. It has to do with the culture of your parents. If you want homogeneity, if you want everyone to look and sound and feel the same, then, well, good luck to you. You're going to be killing creativity and killing excellence, because excellence is not born out of homogeneity. I think I'll perhaps add a couple more points to this, if I may. There are a couple of global south ideas which I'm very influenced by and I find very interesting. In the educational economy of all for themselves, each individual child is essentially competing against the other. So in that way of thinking around education, at least 50% will essentially be failing the school system. And the school system is not only producing successes, but almost by definition producing failures as well. There is a new way of thinking, or not a new way, there is an ancient way, I suppose, of thinking, which is a global south way called Ubuntu. Now, Ubuntu means many things and is actually an active term, you know, when I worked in places like Zambia or Botswana, and my shirt comes from Zambia. It means something very practical, but let me give you a ramification that I've seen in certain schools, not just in Africa, but applied this concept around the world. Imagine that the idea that you say to a classroom that no one child will pass their exams or succeed, whatever that means, unless everybody succeeds. And what do you think would happen? Suddenly we're all responsible for each other. And what would you say would happen if you said to your teachers, no one teacher here is going to get a pay rise by the end of the year unless all of your students succeed? Right? And if all of your students succeed, then you get a serious pay rise. What do you think would happen? This is a very different way, you could clap that. This is a very different way of thinking around inclusion. Inclusion almost doesn't work in the sort of hierarchical, competitive environment that for some reason we've imposed on the concept of transmitting knowledge between generations. That idea of hierarchical competition is really flawed. And pretty much everything that we're saying here is flawed by the way that we bring children up into there are those who are better and those who are worse. And you've encountered this knowledge in this very specific way and been assessed in this very specific way to see if for 5 minutes you manage to hold on to this information enough that you can then write the exam in this particular way, and then congratulations, you're now one of us, the successful people. I mean, I'm telling you now, in 200 years' time, they will look back on this age and they will say, that was stupid. In the same way as we look back 100 years ago and we say, the idea of hitting children was wrong. Yeah? We have the same issue. I'll just say one more thing. Is that all right?
Yes.
I'm doing it anyway, even if it's not all right. A lovely term I wanted to mention global south ideas because I'm very strongly of the opinion that inclusion should not be a white European export that we're imposing on the rest of the world. I think that is almost by definition a contradiction in terms. And so I wanted to just sort of promote some ideas. And one of them was, I love the Maori concept of autism. There is a beautiful Maori term, which I can't pronounce, so I'll just give you the definition is, they walk in their own way. As if to say, we all walk, yeah? I mean, we all get there eventually somehow, not all of us can walk, but we all journey, but some of us journey in our own way, and maybe that's okay. And the idea of trying to get that person who's journeying in that way to do it in this way is ridiculous, you know, and causes only really psychological pain. I'll pause.
No, I think you've given me sort of two themes that I want to pick up on, and I'm going to take to the other panelists as well. And this is, because it's a lens trilogy, this is another lens, which is your personal experience. And I love the fact that you talked about acceptance. So this is a very deeply personal question, Saim. When and where did you feel accepted for your differences? How you were different from society as a whole?
I'm trying to think if it has happened, if I've ever felt like fully accepted. I don't know. I think I've stopped looking for acceptance in that way from other people. And it's more for me to be to have some kind of self-acceptance of the ways in which I am different from other people. And I've sort of learned to like those things and understand that those things actually have a purpose and they make me who I am. And I probably would be boring and dull and, would not know what to do with my life if I did not have all of those things that make me a bit different, So if I had to think of a moment where I felt like very accepted, I guess on a film set, I would say, and particularly
Where
on
you
the set
didn't
of-
have to mask yourself, as Daniel spoke
yeah,
about that.
I didn't, and I just because it was like really truly something that I wanted to do. It was the story that I wanted to tell, and it was just, and it was not like somebody came up to me and said, "Okay, oh, we like all the ways in which you are different," but it was more to do with the fact that everybody on set was collectively trying to create something, and that just by action makes you feel very accepted and makes you feel less lonely about the fact that no, this is not something that only I'm interested in or only I want to do. There are a lot of other people who think this is valuable or interesting or worth exploring. And it also just, for me, I think the funniest or the cutest thing that happened on our set is a small story. Was the oldest member on our set was, I think, some 60 years old. He was a focus puller. A focus puller is a guy who pulls the focus of the camera. So when the actor moves, he makes sure that they're in focus. And he comes from a very old conservative way of thinking. And then he lands on this set of Joyland where there's the lead actress is a trans girl. And the character is a trans character and is being played by a trans actress. And we had a whole session before the shooting began that, whatever, these are the languages that you need to sort of, stay away from, be respectful, etc., and come and ask questions if you have any questions. And now this guy, he starts figuring out that, okay, the lead actress is a trans person or a trans girl. And he starts he gets very awkward and very nervous. And this is the start of a 40-day shoot. And he doesn't communicate with her directly if he has to tell her, "Ke kadam aage aa jaye, kadam piche aa jaye." He always talks through me or talks through other people. This is day one of the set. Sometimes misgenders her, uses the wrong pronouns, etc., when talking about her, not out of any maliciousness, but just because he doesn't know. And then by the end of the shoot, she was his favorite actress. Because he was out of all the people on set, this girl is, the one that I like to watch the most when I'm watching the monitor and pulling focus on her. And I would see them during lunch, sitting by the end of the shoot, having a meal at the same table and talking to each other, which is not something that anybody forced on them, on either of them. But it's something that you allowed by creating a space where they could coexist and co-create something despite maybe coming from very, very different backgrounds. And by the end of that, they would come together organically. And I think that's probably the nicest way to see a manifestation of inclusion. And also, just as the director of that film, just made me feel very, included.
So not only did you feel accepted, you actually
Yeah.
created a space where other people could feel accepted for who they are.
Yeah, I'm not
Which I think is
giving
lovely.
myself credit for that. I'm saying they created the space themselves, and I
That's
think
amazing. But you enabled it.
people have that kind of capacity that no matter what age or what background you come from, people do have the capacity to evolve and change if they're put in the right circumstances, if they're allowed to ask questions, and if they're allowed to take their time. Then you would be surprised how many people would have a different opinion or would grow in a different direction than you would thought that was not possible earlier.
Yeah. Aisha, I'm going to ask you the same question. When and where did you feel like you felt accepted, you could take off the mask, and you could shine with your own differences and abilities?
Yeah, lovely question. I think I'm a talker, and I bond through talking, and I feel those feelings of safety through talking. And this is a very nerdy response, but I think in some of my academic seminars, there have been some spaces where I've been surrounded by people who were super, super different, but we all had a shared perspective for the world. So this was I'm a development practitioner. This was in a development-focused class. And I think even though the space was international and there was a variety of age ranges and a variety of things that we believed, we all were there because we were interested in making a more kind of equitable world. And that connects to something, again, while, on the topic of inclusion that I was thinking of.
So you found your tribe, is what you're saying. Your calling, your tribe.
I definitely found my tribe, and part of what made me really connect with these people was we had this belief in inclusion at an individual level, like show up as you are. But we also believed that inclusion doesn't just mean when you walk into a space you feel free to be yourself. It also has structural implications.
That's really important.
Like, for example, like this conference is really focused on AI. And we can think about things like, and we should be thinking about things like since it's being trained on mostly English, what Anglocentric biases when it comes to Islamophobia, when it comes to racism, gender, sexual orientation. We should be thinking of that individual language level as it affects individual people, but we should also be thinking about on a macro scale, what does that mean for Pakistanis, the majority of whom don't speak English and won't be able to tap into this innovation as much? What does it mean for the underpaid wage workers who are being used to, for example, train these models how to have a sense of morality? In places like Kenya, in India, in the Philippines, we have people being paid $1.50, $2 a day to screen horrific, explicit, violent content to make ChatGPT safe for the rest of us. So I think it's important to think about inclusion when it comes to the political, the economic, that macro scale. So I'm happiest in spaces where people agree with me on stuff like that.
Yeah. Lovely, thank you. Daniel, I'm just going to, you opened the conversation for me about unmasking acceptance, but there's another point you made about, homogeneity. And I think our fear with AI is, obviously technology and AI also makes education, information much more accessible. But at the same time, it is also because of the biases at the back end of it and the data, it also makes, the technology is also, I think the output is homogeneous. How worried are you as somebody who thinks, talks, writes about education, the panel that I had in the morning, there was a whole conversation about how universities will no longer be the same 10, 20 years from now because of AI and homogeneity.
Can I just say something about the acceptance personally?
Please, I would love to hear it, yes. I shouldn't have skipped. That was discriminatory and non-inclusive.
It's fine. I have something to say about it because, there was a great moment where I was a school leader for however many years, and I was going to work in support of schools full-time as a consultant and speaker and writer. And my wife said to me, lovingly, she said, well, look, Daniel, no one's going to take you seriously in education because you're too fat and eccentric and you're not suited and booted. She's right, of course. And I decided I'm just going to lean into it and I'll be as eccentric as I want and I'll be as fat as I am, take me or leave me. And what my sense of, I'm going to be me and I really don't care what anyone else thinks, has somehow been quite a successful formula for me, because I ended up building an organization that spread out across the world. I've met education ministers from all over the world, and it hasn't seemed to got in the way. The success piece for me is about me not being stuck in my limitations, but by being just accepting me. I'm not trying to get anyone else to accept me. I don't care if you accept me or not. I'll accept me, thank you. Now you asked a really good question. What was it?
It was about sameness, homogeneity,
yeah.
because of new technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this yesterday, actually, that the thing I'm worried about is how do you harness fascination in children when everything is at your fingertips on such a superficial level? So how do you have that experience of depth and love, and passion for something? One of the things I'm quite passionate about is jazz. Now, I would say to you that if you want to listen to your first piece of jazz, that I would introduce you to John Coltrane.
Miles Davis?
Hang on, let's go. I'm the teacher here. Right. John Coltrane as your starting point. But I'll say to you, listen to this piece. A few of my favorite things is the name of the piece, but listen to it 5 or 6 times. And only after listening to it 6, maybe 7 times will you begin to get it. I think that's a really good analogy for depth thinking, is plummeting the depth of something is how you can develop a relationship with ideas. And I think that is exactly what AI is getting in the way of. I'll give you one example of how I used AI to help me learn a bit of French, because, you know, my wife is a super brilliant woman who speaks lots of languages, went to Cambridge and all of that. She's exactly the opposite of me. And we went to France for a holiday, and I know that she speaks fluent French, and I thought I'll just learn a bit of French, right? So I used some AI, I used some apps. I learned at least, I think, 200 words, which isn't bad considering I can't remember the name of my children sometimes. And when I got to France, I couldn't speak a word of French. And the reason why I'm saying this is because learning it in a really superficial way and just accessing just a certain part of your brain keeps this information just like there, but it doesn't seep down to here and your lived experience of knowledge. That, I think, is, for me, the biggest concern about what AI has to offer. And in that regard, I don't in any way feel threatened by AI in terms of education, because at the moment it seems to be generations off that very concept. Right.
I'm going to ask my last follow-up from Daniel, and then I'll open the floor up to questions from the audience, because I think it's interesting. Do you think AI is inclusive or not? Daniel.
Sorry, is
AI inclusive?
Well, it's not inclusive if you don't have
because
access.
Because if you could learn French.
Well, if it's not inclusive if you don't have access to
you don't need to go to a library, you don't need a teacher, you can learn French through an app. You're sorted.
I mean, I don't know what you're sorted with. Firstly, by the way, there is a huge divide in the world, even in Pakistan, between those who have access to computers and the internet and those who don't. So this conversation is only relevant for those who do, right? And then for those who do, what are you getting from AI exactly? I know that within my particular slither of knowledge that I have, which is a very, very small aspect of education that I know about. I don't know about geography in education or other types of it. I know about jazz education, obviously. But I don't know about other things. But this little slither of knowledge I have, there is nothing interesting or impressive that any AI has ever told me that either I didn't know about already or wasn't essentially wrong. So I haven't yet come across anything that's like amazing. Oh, look, AI came up with this. I think the thing that kind of it has been useful for is making, quantitative comparisons. I mentioned before, as we were sharing as writers, I've tried using AI to write books. I'm telling you, it's useless. Absolutely useless. Anything I use on AI, I need to rewrite, because you made a very nice. Who said it? Well, somebody said before about it being like a very obedient
intern.
It's such a good analogy. So. Is it inclusive? I don't really think of it as being inclusive or not inclusive. I don't really see the inclusion in it, really. I think I don't see the potential yet. I'm yet to be convinced. I'm also yet to be convinced that this isn't just yet another rabbit hole to send our children down to be glued to screens even more so, which is pretty much antithetical to the way that the world is thinking around, the dangers of phones, the dangers of screen time and all of these sorts of things as parents. So I'm not sat here feeling like, yeah, AI is really inclusive. I don't really get it.
All right, so Daniel is...
Please applaud to that.
So I'm pretty sure none of our panelists think that AI will replace them, right? Right? No. Pretty confident? Don't know. I'm not sure about myself. I'd like to open the floor up for questions. Agar mic hai, to please pass it around. I would request if you could introduce yourself and also the speaker to whom the question is directed. Questions? Raise your hands. Oh yes, we can also see some questions coming in. I'll just read them out. How can AI dataset curation be redesigned to ensure that the concept of belonging is equally experienced by users from globally diverse cultural and ethnic backgrounds in terms of ethical frameworks and language models? That's a very deep question. I understood about half of it. And I'm going to throw this to Aisha.
Sure. It's a very long question, so I'm kind of just processing it. Okay, AI data set curation and doing that to make sure marginalized people are included. Yeah, excellent question. So I think there's, a few different angles to this. The first one is, and a really important one to focus on, is the languages that AI is being trained on. So the vast majority of the data that's going into LLMs today is English. And that means that these tools are a lot more effective for English speakers. Because, I think there is research now that shows that if you are using AI, a lot of, the chat GPTs, etc., in Urdu, in Punjabi, the quality of the information that you're getting out is a lot worse. So just in terms of the increases in productivity and effectiveness, there's already that language barrier. But it goes beyond the language, because what's encoded in languages? A lot of the assumptions that we have about the world, the types of knowledge that are precious to us, the types of biases that we hold. So all of those biases, those assumptions, those worldviews that AI is expressing are based on what it's learned. So the worldviews of people who speak other languages are not represented. And even you can think about something that's quite close to my heart is, the well-being of indigenous communities as well. A lot of those communities aren't even textual to begin with. So all of their language, which is passed down through oral history, also isn't being learned. So that representation is missing. But I think I'll make one last point. So you can try to make the language more representative, but sometimes the AI models are actually too good. And what I mean by that is sometimes the data is absolutely excellent because it's being leveraged by states who are authoritarian and who want to do bad things to their own citizens. So when it comes, the question was about marginalized people. My main concern when it comes to AI and marginalized people is actually what happens when that data is being leveraged against them. For example, in Xinjiang, in China, the state has an algorithm-driven tool that looks at things like your biometric information. It looks at things like how often you've gone to the mosque even, the kind of electricity that you're using. And this algorithm will then suggest people for preventative interventions. Things like sending them to re-education camps, detaining them by the police, restricting their internet use. So I think it can do wonders for inclusion, but only if there are significant safeguards and a lot more that's done to prevent these risks from being carried out as well.
All right, thank you. The next question is, if AI is used to redefine ability, how do we ensure that AI-driven tools for neurodiversity, example, adaptive learning, personalized communication aids, genuinely unlock human potential? Daniel, it's for you.
How does AI unlock human potential?
Especially through, tools such as adaptive learning and personalized communication aids.
Okay, so forgive me if you were in my talk yesterday, but the things I mentioned, the discussions that I've been having with Google and other companies around the world, we're working on things like your computer being able to tell just by the way that you type how you learn, and be able to pick up things like dyslexia, speech language issues, processing issues. And that's really interesting. And that is using AI technology. We have incorporated AI buddies into our training so that if you have a question about how this applies to your particular student in your class, then you could ask our AI to explain it, So you just learn about ADHD and exactly all about it and what to do and what not to do. And then you say, well, look, I've got a child in my class who's struggling like this. What do I do? And then you can have that discussion with the AI. The other AI major innovation which we've been working on is, I mentioned yesterday, again, forgive me if you were there, so just to repeat it, that there will never be enough education psychologists, speech and language therapists, occupational health therapists in the world. But using our AI and platform with Google, you'll be able to make those available to all parents and all teachers around the world at an instant, and to do that at cost. And that's a phenomenon. That is a massive game shifter in understanding and supporting and so on. I'll just pause there. But there are a lot of very interesting innovations. I don't think this is what I was saying yesterday, is that I don't think that we should be thinking about, at this stage, anything other than how do we support the teachers in freeing them up to get to know the children more, in supporting, by minimizing the paperwork and minimizing the stresses of teaching, by helping the teachers get to know the children more, and so on and so forth. Forget trying to get AI to do the work with the children. I'm not keen on that. It's a real dangerous rabbit hole. There are technologies that can help us understand the children, yeah? I'm not interested in anything that's promoting yet more screen time. And I think that you will find that will be counter prevalent to the wave that's going across the world in wanting to shift children away from screens. So, careful what you wish for.
All right, here's another question, and I will throw it to both you, Aisha, and Daniel as well. So the question is, what concrete, measurable steps can policymakers and, well, I'm a media person and Saim is a media person, media people, take to shift the focus of media products from merely representing marginalized groups to actively empowering them as equal creators? Saim, that is for you.
This is a very sort of sophisticated question for our very unsophisticated state of affairs that we live in. I think we're quite a few decades behind from when this actually becomes a relevant question to where we are at. I think for now, policymakers, if they were just to leave media people alone and let them do what they're doing, that would be a great start. Instead of trying to help us or help anyone really, just we're so far behind from just a basic sense of freedom of speech. I think that that's probably a starting point. It's again not a very sophisticated problem to have, but that is the problem that we actually have. So I don't really expect policymakers to do much for us in terms of empowering us, because I think with that empowerment also come a lot of strings about, okay, here's a couple of grants that we're giving now to 10 filmmakers, but what are they going to make? You know, they're going to make something that, you know, projects this institution in this light and that idea in this light, and, you know, so it ends up going into this territory of propaganda. So for me, I think in a state like ours, if artists and media people are just left alone, I think that's a great win for now.
All right, thank you. And another question. What are the biggest barriers to inclusion in today's world, especially for marginalized communities? I'll make this the final question, and I would actually like each of you to answer it, if you could please. What are the biggest barriers to inclusion in today's world, especially for marginalized communities? So, Daniel, I'll just go one by one. Daniel, Aisha, Saim. Final thoughts.
In specific application to education, the biggest barriers around the world to inclusion, apart from attitude and perception, so that's another barrier, I suppose, but the real barriers are money, stress, and time. So if inclusion means it's going to take more time for a teacher, it won't happen. If it's going to cause a teacher more stress, it's not going to happen. And if it's going to cost the school principal more money, it ain't going to happen. So the only way, the only conditions around the world, including in Beacon House, that inclusion can really thrive is if it doesn't cost more time, more money, or more stress. And therefore, you have to read my books to know how to do that.
Excellent, thank you. Aisha.
I'll make this brief. I think the biggest barrier to inclusion, well, I think inclusion is a function of how much power a community has. So the problem is that they are disempowered, and specifically that our governance structures don't allow marginalized communities to make decisions for themselves.
That's a beautiful thought. Thank you. And Saim.
I don't know, just to add on to that, I mean, I agree, but just to make it more specific to just the overall conversation about inclusion, because that's, again, like I think Daniel mentioned it at the beginning, that word kind of has a certain westernized connotation. And I think just to make it specific to Pakistan, I think there's, if we reframe the conversation sometimes and talk about unlearning the exclusion that we learned, which is not from our land, which is not from us. Like, for example, there's a lot of exclusionary behaviors that we adopted from the British during colonization that are not rooted in South Asian culture, that are not rooted in South Asian history. It comes back to, you know, the whole conversation about gender minorities and you know, sexual minorities, etc., who had a very different place in our country and in this part of the land before the British came here. So I think more than trying to learn inclusion from the West, I think maybe sometimes we should think about it in terms of unlearning the exclusion that we learned from them in the first place and going back to where we started and who we were.
Brilliant, thank you. I want to thank SOT, School of Tomorrow, for giving this the opportunity to talk about identity, belonging, and inclusion. And I really thought that I would be able to separate these three lenses, you know, as it were. But I think all three of our panelists spoke about them and challenged, hopefully, our assumptions. Thank you so much.